Good morning and welcome to session 7. Today we're going to be looking at chapters 17 to 19. So in today's lesson we're going to be discussing the story and summarising what has happened so far, and we're going to be looking at including key points in your summary and leaving out unimportant piece of information. Okay, so we're going to be looking at chapters 17, 18 and 19, but as always we're going to look at some vocab first. So regained, okay, this is quite an interesting word, regained. It's a noun and it means to gain use of or possession again after losing it. So if you've regained something, it's something you've lost possession of and you've got it back. So synonyms for regained are recover, rescue, salvage, recapture. An example from the text is, we all paused as he quickly regained his balance and put his glasses straight. Okay, twang. So this is a word that you might not come across very often. So twang is a noun, and a twang is a twang is a strong, sharp ringing sound often made by plucking a string, but also a twang can just be a noise that you might hear. So for example, you might say someone's accent has a twang of something else, a sound of something else. So synonyms for twang are vibration or resonation. So Josie started to half skip and half walk again, bouncing her football up and down with a loud twang. So twang is helping you think about the sound of the football. Okay, alight, again, another unusual word. You wouldn't hear this very often. It's a verb and it means often the train announcers ask you to alight from the train, which means get off. Okay, so alight means get off. So an example from the text here, your synonyms first: get off, get down, disembark, descend. So please alight here for the Jubilee and Victoria lines. So we class that as being part of the semantic field of travel, maybe, trains. It's a word that we associate in particular with vehicles, transport vehicles like trains and buses, alight in the vehicle. Brooch, okay, so the picture should help you with this one. So brooch is a noun and it's a piece of jewellery attached by a clasp or a pin. It's quite old-fashioned brooches, you don't really see them anymore. Some synonyms for brooch are a pin or clasp or clip or badge. So, you might have a prefect badge or a house captain badge at school, and that's a type of brooch. I was sure the Queen would like it because she always wears sparkling brooches that shine like stars on her dresses. Tykes, okay, love this word. It's a noun and it's a slang word for children, especially cheeky ones, or a tyke. So, I've got 2 sons at home, both of them little tykes. Synonyms are kid, tiddler, nipper, small fry. So they're quite slangy words, quite colloquial. You're lucky it's only a few minutes away and I've got tykes of my own. Okay, and I'm guessing the authors use that to indicate the accent, the London accent, because obviously they must be on the way to see the Queen. Okay, so before I start reading, remember to complete your vocab task. So pause the video now and then come back to listen to chapters 17, 18 and 19. Chapter 17, the emergency plan. After I posted the letter, I felt as if 1,000 worms and butterflies and frogs had jumped all into my tummy and were wriggling and squirming and hopping around together. I was even too excited to finish my chocolate chip cookies and a glass of milk, which are my favourite Friday treats. When Mum got home, she kept looking at me and putting her hand on my head to see if I was feeling ill. I wanted more than anything to tell about the greatest idea in the world, but we'd all agreed to keep it secret, and I thought it'd be more fun to surprise Mum with it all later. I spent the whole weekend trying to stay as quiet as I could in case my mouth said something when I wasn't paying attention, and even when Mum took me to a farm to see goats and donkeys and rabbits for our Sunday adventure, I couldn't help thinking about the Queen as she'd gotten our letter yet. The whole weekend seemed to take forever to finish, but just when I thought it never would, Monday morning finally arrived. When I got to the bus stop, Tom and Josie and Michael were all waiting. She must have read it by now, said Michael, bumping into a lamppost in his excitement. We all paused as he quickly regained his balance and put his glasses straight. And I bet our special policemen are looking for Ahmet's family already, said Josie, starting to half skip and half walk again, bouncing her football up and down with a loud twang. Yeah, I bet they're jumping from special planes right now to find all of them, said Tom, gripping the straps of his rucksack as if it was really a parachute. We were all still chatting excitedly as we got onto the bus and spent the whole journey imagining what else the Queen might be doing to help Armet. But Monday passed by, and even though I looked up at Mrs. Khan after every break time, hoping she had something special to say, there was no sign that anything had happened at all. Miss Hemsley looked normal too, and when we asked Armet if anything exciting had happened to him, he looked puzzled and then said, "Bag not smell anymore, look," before opening his rucksack and inviting each of us to smell it. On Tuesday it was the same, except this time all of us were feeling more worried than excited, and the worms and butterflies and frogs in my tummy were starting to make me feel sick. "What if she never got the letter?" whispered Josie, as we were all making a drawing of different planets in the solar system. "What if it got lost in the post? What if she—" "I don't know," I whispered back, because I really didn't. "We have to think of something else," said Tom, glancing around to make sure Mrs. Khan wasn't looking. "We've only got 3 days left until the gates close." "Tom, back to work, please," ordered Mrs. Khan, looking our way. We all quickly put our heads down low. I snuck a look over at my shoulder at Armet, who was busy colouring in a large orange circle that was obviously Mars. Tom was right. For whatever reason, the Queen wasn't helping us. We needed to think of something else. We needed an emergency plan. I looked at my half-finished drawing of the planet Earth and, turning it over, decided to draw out an emergency plan instead. While everyone else copied out facts about their planets to learn off by heart, I stared at the emergency plan and wondered if it would work. I wasn't sure that it would, but Dad always said that you could only ever know if something would work or not after you had tried it out first. That afternoon on the bus home, I showed the others my emergency plan. Josie looked at me and, placing her football underneath her chin, said, "That's crazy." "Yeah, we can't do that. We'd get detentions for a year," said Tom. "It's the only way," I said, looking at it carefully, and this is what it looked like. Sorry, can you see that? So the emergency plan is us, train, taxi, Buckingham Palace, Queen, special policeman, tea with the Queen, police, Armet's dad and mum. Very simple. Not. Michael shook his head. "We'll get expelled," he whispered, looking around the bus to make sure no one had overheard anything. "No, we won't," I said, trying to sound more sure. "The special police would never let us in to see her," said Michael. "They will when we explain everything," I said. "We'll go in when she's having her tea. That way we can be sure she's in." Everyone fell silent. I could tell they were all thinking extra hard, because Josie was biting her bottom lip, and Tom was looking down at his tie with a frown, and Michael was tapping his finger on the lens of his glasses. After a few seconds, Tom looked up and asked, "How will we afford a tube ticket?" "It's okay," I said, leaning in. "I've got some pocket money saved up." "How much have you got?" asked Josie. £4.50, I whispered, so that nobody on the bus would hear. It would have been more, but I had bought some extra sweets last week. "That's not enough for a ticket," turned Michael. "I've got £11.32 at home we can use." "I'll bring all my pocket money too," said Josie. "Me too," said Tom, "and all my brothers." "But how are we going to get the tube tickets?" asked Michael. "Won't the ticket office people tell the police on us if they see us without a grown-up?" "We won't go into the ticket office. We'll just get them from the ticket machines," I said. "I know how to use them. Mum shows me how to buy tickets all the time when we go on our adventures." "Cool," said Josie, looking more sure. "So, shall we do it then? Tomorrow?" I whispered. Josie nodded and twirled the football around between her fingers. Michael looked around and, pushing up his glasses, gave a nod too. And Tom looked over at Josie and Michael before giving me a thumbs up. "Okay," I said, as I tapped the end of my pencil against my cheek and looked at the plan again. "I'll get some tea bags, just in case she's not expecting us and runs out." "I'll get some biscuits," promised Tom. "I'll bring as much pocket money as I can," said Michael. "And maybe we can all get a gift for the Queen," added Josie. "You know, to make her want to help us." "Should we wear anything special?" asked Tom. "Don't people get dressed up when they're meeting the Queen, like hats and dresses and crowns and things? Maybe we should put on our best clothes underneath our uniforms." "Yeah, that's a brilliant idea," I said, "and we can get change in the toilets at the palace." "Hold on," Michael looked at us, his large eyes even rounder and wider. "We can't all go, can we? Mrs. Khan won't believe us if we say we're all sick on the exact same day. And what if she calls our parents?" Everyone fell quiet again. We all wanted to go and see the Queen together, but Michael was right. After a few seconds, Josie said, "I can stay behind. My parents don't like me being friends with Armet anyway. They'd probably get really mad if they found out I ran away from school for him." "Let me go," said Tom. My uncle's a policeman in New York and says 411 and Tango Fox chicken and things, so I can talk to the Queen's Special Police. Michael sighed. OK, so I'll stay too, even though I've always wanted to meet the Queen. OK then, Tom will come with me, I said. Quick, it's our stop, cried out Josie, frantically pushing the bell. Later that night, as I got ready for bed, I wondered what Dad would have said if he knew I was going on an adventure to try and meet the Queen. I think he would have put a record on and danced around the living room, just like he did whenever he was really happy. The last thought made all the worms and frogs and butterflies in my tummy settle down and helped me fall into a deep sleep, filled with dreams of my dad dancing with the Queen. Chapter 18. Stan, the Taxi Man. I'm not sure if Tintin ever woke up in the morning of an adventure feeling hungry and sick at the exact same time, but that's how I felt when I woke up the next day. It was so early that the birds had only just started to sing and the sun hadn't yet risen properly. As soon as the sky began to turn from dark blue to golden pink, I jumped out of bed and started to get ready. The hardest thing was trying to fit my school uniform over my best clothes. It made me look all puffy like a blowfish, and the buttons on my school shirt looked like they might pop open at any moment. But luckily Mum didn't notice anything because she was tired and still rubbing her eyes a lot when I left. I got to the bus stop 15 minutes early, just like I said we would, but there was no one there except an old lady and two grown-ups in suits. After a few minutes, Tom came running up the road. I could tell right away that he hadn't slept much because his eyes looked red and his usual spiky hair was flat in the back. Then came Josie, looking as excited and nervous as I felt inside, and Michael, who tripped over his shoelaces and stumbled but kept running up to us anyway. "Got everything?" asked Josie. I nodded and showed her the tube map I had taken from my mum's used less drawer and the tea bags I had taken from the kitchen drawer. We'd all brought things to give to the Queen. Tom had brought a packet of shortbread biscuits, Josie had a new packet of football stickers, and Michael had brought a box of fudge that had a crown in the box. I brought my favourite astronaut ruler. Even though the astronaut didn't move anymore, I was sure the Queen would like it because she always wears sparkling brooches that shine like stars in her dresses. Maybe when she was in school she wanted to be an astronaut too. When we'd stored all the presents away safely in my bag, Josie counted all the money we had collected. All of us emptied out our piggy banks and saving jars, and Tom had gone into his brother's room to see what he could find. "They've got loads of coins everywhere. Can't believe I've never done it before," he exclaimed, bringing out a fishful of coins. In the end, we had exactly £27.62, a fortune. Half of £27.62 is, Josie squeezed her eyes tight and quickly did the maths in her head, £13.81. She gave half the money to me and half to Tom for safekeeping. "You sure you know which tube to take?" asked Josie. The freckles on her face were sliding up and down because she was scrunching up her nose every few seconds. She only ever does that when she's extra nervous and it makes her look like a hamster. "Yup, we take the pink line to King's Cross and then the dark blue line to Green Park," I said. Mum always takes me on trains for our really big adventures, so I know the way. "How far is the palace from the train station?" asked Tom. His voice sounded squeaky, but I couldn't tell if that was because he was nervous or excited. "I don't know," I said, "but I think there's a bus stop in front of the palace, so we might need to take a taxi. Shouldn't be too far though, so hopefully we won't spend all our money." "Guys, our bus is here," said Michael, as he stuck out his hand so the bus driver would stop. "Remember what to tell Mrs. Carn," I whispered, "that me and Tom are sick and that our mum said we'll be back tomorrow." Josie nodded. "Good luck," and giving us a quick wave, she followed Michael onto the bus to school. After the bus had disappeared, Tom and I crossed the street and walked up to the bus stop where all the buses travelling in the opposite direction stopped. When the bus we needed finally came, I put out my hand and we got on, nervously looking at the bus driver in case he asked us why we weren't in school. But she didn't. In fact, she barely even looked at us. We sat on the bus all the way to the last stop and then holding hands crossed the big road to the tube station. There were at least 1 million people, all dressed in suits, rushing around trying to get through the barriers. They looked angry and red in the face, and there was lots of tutting and head shaking. I'd never been to the train station when it was so busy before, and I didn't like it. It made my head feel hot and fuzzy. "Come on," said Tom, nudging me. We walked over to the ticket machines where there was a long line of people. Some of them looked down at us with frowns on their faces, but no one said anything, so we didn't have to say anything back. When we finally got to the front of the queue, we walked up to one of the machines. It looked more scary than I remembered. There were at least 100 buttons surrounding a large screen, and a slot that looked like a letterbox at the bottom. "Go on," whispered Tom. "Okay," I said, not wanting to be a coward. I took a deep breath, stood on my toes and walked over to the screen. I pressed the button for new ticket, then child, and then typed in Buckingham Palace. So it's spelled wrong, guys. But nothing happened. I tried again, but the machine kept flashing, so I don't know if you can see it, but he spelt Buckingham Palace, BUK-Kingham Palace. So that's why it's not registering. Just realised I'm showing you in the wrong bit. It's just there. Do you kids need help? Asked a woman from the queue. She was dressed in a green coat and shiny shoes and had curly black hair and glasses. Tom's eyes became wide and he shook his head, but I nodded. The woman stepped forward. Where do you need to go? She asked. Buckingham Palace, I said, for our school trip. I tried to make my voice sound more deep and grown-up sounding. The woman frowned, then looking at her watch said, OK. She quickly pressed lots of buttons on the screen and said, there you go, before stepping back into the line again. We looked up at the machine, which was flashing £8.90 at us. Tom quickly got the money out of his bag and put in the exact change. 2 pieces of pink card instantly popped out like sweets from a sweet machine, and grabbing them, we thanked the lady and ran down the stairs to where I knew the train to the city would be. We squeezed ourselves out onto the platform. It was so full of people that I was afraid we wouldn't be able to get on the train. I'd never seen so many people squashed together in one place before. But when the train came, everyone flooded onto it like a giant wave and took us with them. Tom grabbed hold of my arm and I grabbed his, and soon we found ourselves pressed like sandwich filling between lots of people, all busy looking at their phones and listening to music. This is good, said Tom, his face squashed up against a large belly. I tried to nod, but someone's book was touching my head. We watched as lots of stations passed by and looked at all the different people getting on and off the train. Finally, we heard the driver announce that the next station we were going to was King's Cross. We have to follow the dark blue line, I said to Tom, after we jumped out onto the platform. We followed signs of the Piccadilly line and got onto another train. Easy. Now that I wasn't feeling so nervous, I realised I was hungry. I'd been so busy packing a present for the Queen, I'd forgotten about the emergency bag of sweets I'd meant to bring. Do you think the Queen would mind if I had one of her biscuits? I asked Tom. He shook his head eagerly. She must have lots in her kitchen, especially if she has tea every day. He ripped open the packet and passed me one of the thick, crumbly fingers that lay inside. It was the most delicious biscuit I had ever had, probably because I knew it was meant to be eaten by the Queen. We had another biscuit eaten on the train, and after just a few minutes, the train lady announced, the next station is Green Park. Please alight here for the Jubilee and Victoria lines. I like the train lady. She has a nice voice. I imagine she looks like Mary Poppins and sits at the very front of the train next to the driver in her own special chair. It must be fun going through all the stations and telling people which ones are coming next. We hurried off the train and followed the signs to the taxis. Running up the stairs, we found a long line of black cabs waiting in a row. Inside the one at the front was a man with curly red hair. He was eating a sandwich and bobbing his head along to the radio station. When he saw us looking at him through a window, he rolled it down and leaned out. What can I do for you two? Please, we need to get to Buckingham Palace, I said, just as loudly and clearly as I could, because I remembered my Uncle Lenny saying that there was nothing taxi drivers hated more than people who didn't say where they wanted to go clearly enough. The taxi man leaned forward and looked around. Why are you on your own? He asked, frowning. We're meeting our teacher there. We're on a trip and we got separated from our class, and our teacher said that if anyone got lost, we had to meet the class there, said Tom in a rush. The taximan frowned again and he rubbed his chin. All right, he said eventually, hop in and be quick about it. I ain't here to be chauffeuring lots of kids around all day. You're lucky it's only a few minutes away and I've got Tykes of my own. We jumped in quickly. The taximan locked the doors and in a single move swerved off. As he drove onto the main road, he looked at us in the funny rectangular-shaped mirror that cars always have the right at the front. Uncle Lenny says they're so the drivers can check the traffic behind them, but I think they're so that drivers can look at people sitting in the back seat when they think there's no one looking at them. What will you be doing at Buckingham Palace today then? He asked. We're going to meet the Queen, said Tom before I could stop him. Is that right now? Asked the taximan, looking at us again in the mirror. His eyes were smiling. Tom clapped his hands over his mouth and didn't say anything else, but the taximan just laughed and said, well, when you see her, say aye from me. I nodded and the taximan laughed again. After a few minutes, the taxi came to a stop in the traffic. The taximan looked at his watch. They'll be doing the change in the guards soon. You'll have to walk from here, I'm afraid. He turned around to look at us and pointed to his right. See those arches there? Just walk under them and keep going straight down this big red road, okay? The palace is right at the end, past the water fountains. Tom nodded and took out the exact money it had been on the meter. The taximan shook his head. Don't worry, this one's on me. Just tell your teacher to be more careful next time. Thanks, said Tom as we jumped out. You're the best taxi driver ever. And the taximan drove off laughing. I like London taxi drivers, said Tom, taking out another 2 of the Queen's biscuits and stuffing them into his mouth. They're better than the New York ones. So do I said, watching as the taxi disappeared out of sight. Chapter 19, The Queen's Palace. There are so many police, whispered Tom as we walked down the big bright red road. Everywhere we looked there were lots of orange cones and police in yellow jackets sitting on horses. I know, I whispered back. We didn't really need to whisper, but seeing so many police cars and officers was making us both nervous, especially as we weren't with a grown-up. "Come on," I said, pulling Tom behind me. "Let's go." We walked just as fast as we could, but the red road was long and it felt as if we'd been walking for miles before we finally saw the fountain the taxi man had told us about. "Look," said Tom, pointing up at the giant black gates of the palace. The spiked ends looked like they'd been dipped in gold, and there was hundreds of people of everywhere. It looked like this. I've only been to Buckingham Palace once, guys. I was 3 and I'd broken my leg at the time and insisted that my mum and my dad took my buggy and my wheelchair everywhere, and they left me in my buggy outside Buckingham Palace and wandered off with my wheelchair without me in it. They forgot, and they came back for me, but it was about 5 minutes later, and I constantly whined my mum up saying that she abandoned me outside Buckingham Palace with all these people that looked just like that. "There must be something happening," I said, looking around. I don't remember it being this busy when I came with Mum. The road ahead of us was filled with hundreds of people, lots of them with cameras around their neck. Some were talking and waving to the policemen, others were climbing the great fountain and sitting on its short walls, and yet more were leaning against the grey barriers that had been placed all along the sides of the pavements. There were people with large cameras resting on their shoulders, looking like they were getting ready to film something, and huge helicopters that looked like giant dragonflies humming in the sky above and making the air shake. "Maybe someone special's coming to visit," suggested Tom. "Let's go over there and find out," I said, pointing to the 2 biggest gates that lay in front of the palace. Each gate had a golden crest that was almost as big as me stuck on them, and showed 2 lions dancing in front of some large spiky leaves. 2 police officers, dressed all in black and with large stars in the middle of their helmets, were sitting on the horses in front of the gates, silently observing the crowds. "Are those the Queen's police?" asked Tom, pointing to them. "Shall we go and ask if we can see them?" I shook my head. "The Queen's extra special police are the ones in the red jackets and giant hats. They're called the guards of the palace, so we have to ask one of them. Come on, I'll show you." Holding each other's hands, we zigzagged our way through the crowd until we found a tiny gap in one of the grey barriers. Squeezing through it, we ran across the big red road until we reached the barriers next to where big black and golden gates were. Trying to say "excuse me" and "sorry" as we pushed our way past the crowds was hard work, but after a few minutes we finally reached the palace gates. "See," I said, pointing through the railings, "those are the special guards. We need to get near one of them." Tom pushed his face through the 2 of the railings and stared at the palace guards. You can tell right away they're more special than the normal police because they wear bright red coats with extra shiny buttons, and they have coins on their chests and huge hairy hats that cover their eyes. They also carry extra pointy guns and stand still as statues inside special tiny black houses. The palace guards both suddenly said "hut" and marched across the front of the palace like toy soldiers. "Why did they say hut?" asked Tom, watching with his mouth open. "Because they're swapping huts," I said, remembering what my mum had told me when I had asked her the same question. "Oh, cool," said Tom. "So what do we do now? How do we give them a note for our Queen?" "I don't know," I said, realising that I must have remembered things wrong. When I had come with Mum, I was sure the guards had been standing much closer to the front gates. Now they were so far away we couldn't even send them the note by airmail, even if we could make it into a paper aeroplane that could fly straight. I was wondering what we should do when in the distance a bell chimed 11 times. When it finished, a man in the bright blue tracksuit top standing next to us shouted, "They're going to start any minute now. Time to get your cameras ready." And a large group of people standing in front of us quickly got out their cameras, and everywhere I looked, hundreds of people started doing the same thing. Then suddenly, everyone fell quiet. I looked back through the gates towards the palace. Both of the palace guards were standing extra still, and like a sweet wrapper being crunched together every few seconds, we heard the distant sound of marching. "Look!" cried out Tom, clinging onto the gates for a better view. He pointed towards the water fountain where, from far away, little red dots of black and gold were marching and playing trumpets and drums. "Let's get to the front," I whispered, saying "sorry" and "excuse me, please," and we pushed our way back to the front near the grey barriers. "Look over there," said Tom, prodding me as he pointed to where 2 large palace gates stood closed. "There's none of these barriers on the pavements there. See, we might be able to reach the guards better from there." And I leaned forward just as far as I could and looked more closely. Tom was right. There were no barriers on that part of the pavement at all, which meant anyone standing there could easily pass a note to one of the guards as they marched into the palace. "You're right, let's get closer." But before we could push our way along the barriers to the corner of the pavement where there were none, we heard a police officer shout, "Everyone, stand back, the gates will open now." And as the crowd surged forward and forced us to press up against the barriers, we saw the large gold-crested gates begin to swing open from the inside, and the palace courtyard was now filled with lots of palace guards who had silently joined the two we had seen before and were all standing still. "Whoa, that's awesome!" cried Tom, his eyes wide and his cheek pink as he pointed back up the main road towards the fountain. What had seemed like tiny flashes of red and gold and black from the distance had now transformed into hundreds of tall soldiers marching in time as drums and trumpets filled the air, led by a man dressed in a shimmering golden jacket who was carrying a stick topped by a diamond that was as big as a doorknob. They all marched towards the gates with a rush of energy that made the ground shudder. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I'd never ever seen anything like this in real life before. "10 huts!" shouted someone from behind the palace gates. All the soldiers immediately stamped the ground with one foot and swiveled around on their extra shiny black boots to face the open gates. "The man in the gold coat," said Tom, poking me in the arm. "He must be extra special. Let's give him the note. But look, they're going in now." Everyone around us flashed their cameras as the man in the golden coat and the palace guards behind him marched closer and closer to the palace gates. The other guards waiting in the palace courtyard suddenly began to march on the spot before beginning to march out through the gates. "Oh, I get it. They're changing over. So those ones are going home and those ones behind the man in the gold coat are going to stay here with the Queen. But," I turned around, "that means the gates are going to shut as soon as the swap is done, and when they were, we wouldn't have another chance to get a note to the Queen." Tom looked at me with his mouth open, and I looked back at him with my mouth open, and I could tell we both thought the exact same thought as each other. Feeling my hand started to shake, I pulled the note out of my coat pocket and held it out. We had to do it, we had to. It wasn't every day that you got to go to the Queen's palace and see a special guard so up close, but even though I tried to make my voice come out, it stayed stuck in my throat. Those are huge," said Tom, looking at the guns the soldiers were holding over their soldiers. I was looking at them too. They were long and on extra pointy ends that suddenly looked more sharp and shiny and much more pointed than they had done a few minutes ago. The man in the golden jacket and all the palace guards behind him were now beginning to march past us. In just a few seconds, they would be entering through the gates, and when they did and those gates were closed, there would be no chance of telling the Queen about Ahmet, and it would be all my fault. I clutched the note tightly. I could feel my heart thumping in my throat and my fingers beginning to sweat, and then somehow I began to move. I think when you're the most scared you've ever been in your life and you have to do something you've never ever done before, your brain switches off and your arms and legs do all the thinking for you, which is why you feel as if you're moving underwater. That's what happened to me the moment I began running. I felt as though I was running underwater, as if someone else was doing everything for me, when of course they weren't. It was all me. I felt myself clambering over the barriers in front of me and slowly running out into the red road. I could feel people's eyes turning to watch me and a sudden breeze on my face. From underneath my feet I could feel the surprisingly bouncy surface of the road as if it were a soft red carpet, and in my hands I could feel the rough edges of the note. All around me the sound of drums and trumpets and the crunching of boots faded away, and then suddenly I was there, standing behind the last row of the Queen's special guards as they were walking into the palace. I watched as my right hand lifted itself higher and higher and higher until it finally touched a red-coated elbow, and without me even telling it to, my mouth opened and shouted, "Excuse me, sir!" And that's when everything went funny, because suddenly the world sped back up, and there were people gasping and cameras flashing and hooves thundering and helicopters helicoptering, and before I knew what was happening, a looming tower of policemen with extra shiny stars on their helmets surrounded me, blocking out the sky. Everything started to fade away into a sea of black. I felt my legs wobble like a big plate of runner jelly, and crashing in my ears began to roar as the ground rushed up to meet me. Okay, so in your booklet you'll see the discussion questions there. Okay, so that's where you're going to answer these questions. So first question, why is our narrator feeling so shaky at this point? Why does his hands start to shake? Why is he feeling so nervous? What does the narrator think might happen? And how is the narrator feeling? What evidence is there in the passage? So look at this excerpt that we've got here. I clutched the note tightly. I could feel my heart thumping in my throat and my fingers beginning to sweat, and then somehow I began to move. So how's the narrator feeling? So we used some of these words earlier, you know, when we were looking at one of our vocab words, and one of the words that you might want to use here is apprehensive. Apprehensive goes with the adverb that we were looking at, anxiously. So is this anxious? Is this apprehensive? You know, how is the narrator specifically feeling here? Okay, so what do you think is going to happen next? So what's happened here? The narrator clearly has fainted. So what do you think might happen next before we read on? So just have a go and answer those questions in the boxes there. Okay, today's independent activity is to summarise the entire story so far. So the key to this is actually not writing for extended amounts of time, really keeping it very short and succinct. So remember that we only need the key piece of information and leave out any minor piece of information that do not change the storyline. So get this broken down into brief sentences. What has happened so far? Try and summarise the story in 5 sentences or less. Okay, and then today's exit ticket, you've just got a couple of questions to answer. How has the plan gone so far? How do you think Ahmet will react when he finds out what they are doing? Give me 5 words to describe the narrator. And do you think the children will be punished for carrying out the plan? Because that's the one that's been bothering me as a parent. These children, they're like 10. You know, I'd be really cross if any of you guys went off and did this and they got on a tube in London, which I don't even think I could do, and I'm 38. They have got all the way to Buckingham Palace. They've stolen money, they've skipped school, and they've now broken into Buckingham Palace. Okay, so do you think they'll be punished for what they've done, or do you think people are going to react to it really positively? Okay, so that's the end of session 7, and I'll see you tomorrow for session 8.